Hello, welcome to Living in a Chemical Soup. My name is Lynn. I'll be your host for this evening. I'm talking from Alberta, Canada, and I'm joined with a whole bunch of guests and an invitee tonight who from all over, I would guess the US and Canada, maybe even international, I don't know. Anyway, I host an online community called Living in a Chemical Soup. In our community, we like to talk about what's in everyday household products and, of course, share ideas for better, safer alternatives. Tonight, we have a special guest, Dr. Ann Steinemann, who is talking to us about and helping us with answering questions about everyday household products and toxins. Before I introduce Dr. Steinemann, I'd like to give a little word about what's going to happen during tonight's talkcasts for people who have joined live in the chat room. First, I'm going to ask a whole bunch of questions. Dr. Steinemann, who would like to be called Ann, Ann will answer my questions, and that'll take a little while. So if you can just hang on and listen, because I can't focus on both listening to Ann and the answers, because this is kind of complicated stuff, and focus on the chat room. So I'm going to ask that everyone who's joining us in the chat room and on the phones, welcome. If you can hang on to your questions until we're done with the one-on-one, then I'll be unmuting people and looking in the chat room and actually paying attention there, and be inviting anyone who would like to call in or type in questions. That's your chance to talk with Ann. I'll tell you a little bit about TalkShoe. If you're on the phone and in the chat room, you can click this little request to talk button, but you don't have to. I'll see if you're on the phone and just come to you and ask if you'd like to ask a question later on, because some people might be just on the phone listening, and that's fine too. And when you do get unmuted, this lady's voice will say, "You are unmuted." And that means, oh, you're joining the call. And this call is being recorded and will be available for download later on. Probably by tomorrow it'll be ready, or earlier. What else? If you get disconnected, just do what you did to come back in, and it should be fine. Same thing if you're in the chat room. It's known, it has happened that the chat room goes kablooey. If it freezes up or whatever, just go out and come back in and you should be fine. Anyone who's in the chat room who doesn't have long distance or would like to call in, there's also a feature called Shoe Phone, and it might work for you. Might not, but if you see in the chat room there's a little button that says Shoe Phone, and you just click it once, connect, and it's a built-in VoIP phone, and you could join the call if you'd like to talk with Ann later on. One click should get you there. But it doesn't work for everybody. Okay. Welcome, Ann.
Thank you so much. It's really a joy and honor to be here.
I'm just going to introduce you to the folks in the chat room and the folks who will be listening to this on the download later on. Ann C. Steinemann is a professor of civil and environmental engineering and professor of public affairs at the University of Washington. She received her PhD in Civil and Environmental Engineering from Stanford University. Dr. Steinemann specializes in topics of exposure analysis, such as the effects of pollutants on human and environmental health, combining expertise in engineering, economics, law, policy, and public health. She received the National Science Foundation Career CAREER Award, in addition to university and national teaching awards. She conducted the first two national, that's a big word, epidemiological studies.
Beautiful.
Thank you. Epidemiological studies of chemical sensitivity, its causes and symptoms related to exposures, and its overlaps with asthma. Dr. Steinemann has directed more than $6 million of funded research and serves as advisor to agencies and industries on environmental issues. In her community service, Dr. Steinemann has investigated more than 200 sick buildings to identify pollutant sources, reduce potential exposures, and improve health of occupants. Boy, I wish you would have been at my school. Among her recent publications are the textbooks Microeconomics for Public Decisions, Southwestern from 2005, and Human Exposure Analysis, CRC Press from 2007. Okay, that is who we're talking with tonight, and it's just a pleasure and a real opportunity that I was so excited about, and I know people in the chat room were so excited to be able to talk to you as well, because this is such a confusing issue when we're talking about what is in products. I mean, without a chemistry degree behind you, it's pretty hard to understand even labeling. And so I prepared a few questions, and I'd like to start with those. How does that sound?
Wonderful. Thank you.
All right. Let's first talk about the past research which you did called a National Population Study of the Prevalence of Multiple Chemical Sensitivity. And it's from the Environmental Health Archives of Environmental Health. That was done in 2004. And the National Prevalence of Fragrance Sensitivity from the journal Environmental Health. What is the prevalence of both of these?
Well, I think it's really stunning. I conducted 2 national surveys, each one more than 1,000 people, and I'll tell you the averages. But on average, the prevalence of MCS is, I have it right here, 11.4% nationally. And then in terms of fragrance sensitivity, more than 30% of the general population said that they had adverse health effects when they were next to someone who had a scented product on. More than 19% of the general population reported headaches, breathing difficulties, or other adverse health effects when exposed to air fresheners. And more than, 10.9% of the general population reported adverse health effects when exposed to scented laundry products vented outdoors. Now, these percentages were almost twice as high for asthmatics. So this really tells me this is a widespread, significant problem. A lot of people are getting sick from these chemical products.
Definitely. And most of us in the chat room and listening in can understand that firsthand, or know somebody who experiences it daily. Now, these numbers, I guess, are proven out too, because whenever I talk to anyone about my particular sensitivities, they say, I know people like you.
Hmm?
Yeah. It seems to be pretty common, and those numbers are shocking, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think so too. Well, what's interesting is that, as you said, you talk to someone, either they are chemically sensitive or they know someone who is, but so many people who are chemically sensitive aren't able to function in the community because of these everyday exposures. And if we could reduce the exposures, you'd have more people able to be a part of the community.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Excellent point. I'm just wondering, do you have a personal connection, or why are you interested in this area?
Oh, thank you for asking. Well, let's just say I have firsthand experience with MCS for the past, I'd say, 17 years. It's a devastating condition. It's real, it's physical, and it's really been my passion to try to bring the scientific evidence to show the seriousness of MCS. And also, I've heard from more than 200 people individually about how they become sick from exposures to everyday chemicals. And so this is really, again, my passion. I want to try to help these people.
Oh, well, thank you for doing all you're doing. It's incredible, really.
Well, thank you. I feel very fortunate to be able to do this work.
Well, it's, surprising, not surprising, but more and more people who I talk to in terms of, let's say, medical doctors, researchers, you ask why, and it's because they themselves have become so sensitive to chemicals. So many of my physicians themselves, so I guess when you're touched and you really understand it personally, it opens up that whole need to understand, and that's where we're at as a society, isn't it? Trying to understand this.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's see here. You talked about the prevalence being, around 12% of the general population, which is a high number. You'd think that medicine would be up on this whole area of treating patients with chemical sensitivities, but clearly the story goes over and over again where people have to go from doctor to doctor to doctor, and many don't find doctors and seek outside of the medical profession for some kind of help or treatment. How do you explain this gap in the numbers showing such a high prevalence with really little to no help from doctors.
I know what you mean. This is also what I'm fighting. It seems to me that doctors, or traditionally trained doctors, view this, I don't know why, but with skepticism, probably because they haven't been trained in understanding the links between chemical exposures and health. Typically they think, well, if it either causes cancer or it doesn't. They don't realize that between no effects in cancer, there's a range of other morbidity effects that these chemical exposures can cause. Also, without trying to get too much into the politics, that a lot of the medical education research is funded by the pharmaceutical companies, and pharmaceutical companies are the pesticide companies, and pesticides are implicated in MCS, and it's the whole field of synthetic organic chemistry. So there's an implicit financial interest on the part of the companies funding medical research and training to try to repudiate MCS. And so you're really fighting against an industry too. Also, there aren't any quick, easy fixes with drugs that can cure MCS. It often requires getting off of all traditional synthetic medicine to be able to become better and detoxify.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's not patentable. One of the best strategies for reducing the incidence of the illness and the symptoms is basically exposure. But you can't avoiding exposure, avoidance. But you can't make a profit on avoidance or on patenting exposure. So there's not a real profit here. So it's, again, without getting too much into the money and the politics of it, but that's what I find that traditional doctors just don't get it yet.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, makes a lot of sense. There's that whole cycle, isn't there?
Mm-hmm. You can take heart that, it's almost like the process of acceptance. If you look at diseases such as polio or multiple sclerosis or autism, when they first started emerging, physicians and the public also thought they were just psychological or they weren't a real illness. But then finally they get accepted, and I think MCS will be the same way, of course.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of other... a lot of people have been on this journey before, and it just doesn't come easily. But they've made it, so we have hope there.
Yes.
Okay. My next question is... I have to find it. Okay. People with chemical sensitivities find it difficult... No, we just did that one. Okay, what I want to ask you is, I know that you've been doing a ton of research and really pointed research. How can you kind of fill in how your studies contribute to change, let's say, in medicine, or do they, or even in public policy, is which kind of I think most of us are hoping for eventually?
Yes. Well, that's what I'm really excited about, this recent work that I've been doing. And I'll summarize it here, and we can talk in more detail. Since the consumer products, fragrance consumer products, seems to be a major source of problems and adverse effects, especially in people with MCS, I wondered, well, what's in these products that's causing all of these adverse health effects? The adverse health effects that people told me about were things like headaches, breathing difficulties, dizziness, asthma attacks, seizures, even loss of consciousness. I've witnessed people lose consciousness and have seizures around exposures to things like air fresheners or dryer sheets. So I'm looking at the labels of these products, and you look at the labels and they look fairly benign. They may say propellant or fragrance or detergent, but then you think, well, how can these seemingly innocuous chemicals be causing these adverse health effects, and who's regulating these products? Well, so what I did is I analyzed the 25 best-selling fragrance consumer products, air fresheners, laundry supplies, dryer sheets, household cleaners, personal care products, shampoos and soaps, things that we come in contact with every day, to try to find out their chemical constituents. And what was absolutely stunning was that out of these 25 products, I detected nearly 600 volatile organic compounds, VOCs. A VOC is like a fume. Almost 600 of them. None of them were on any of the product labels, and only on 2 were on any material safety data sheet. And nearly 25% of these 600 VOCs are classified as toxic or hazardous under federal laws. In other words, if they were coming out of a smokestack, they'd be regulated and restricted. Because they're in our everyday consumer products, they're not. There's even chemicals in these products classified as hazardous air pollutants. And according to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, not even one molecule of exposure to these hazardous air pollutants can be considered safe. So oftentimes people will say, well, it's not really a significant level. The levels are low. To that, I have a few responses. One is, for some of these chemicals, there is no safe exposure level. Another aspect is that for some of these chemicals, lower levels can be more hazardous than higher levels of exposure, and this is kind of turning around our whole view of toxicity. We used to think the dose makes the poison, but now we're finding for some chemicals a lower dose may actually be more hazardous. There's another point, is that even if it's a low levels add up. If you're continuously exposed to these, they add up, and these chemicals stay in your body. And finally, we're not necessarily exposed to individual chemicals, we're exposed to mixtures of chemicals, and we have very little knowledge about the toxicity of these mixtures. So I'm really concerned about these chemicals that are in everyday consumer products that are essentially unregulated. A fragrance, by the way, a fragrance can contain up to several hundred chemicals. None of these chemicals need to be disclosed or tested anywhere in any way, and that to me is absolutely, it's stunning.
It is.
And yes, and nearly all of the chemicals in fragrances are derived from petroleum or petroleum products in some way. So it seems to be these synthetic chemicals derived from petroleum that are causing a lot of the health effects.
Mm. Oh wow, you've clarified a lot already. That's incredible. So many of us have experience, firsthand experience, as you do, with the health problems you were talking about, and we're banging our fists. We're saying to our families, we're saying to our friends, be careful. 600 VOCs in the product. 25 products, and when you go to the MSDS sheet, where you think, well, okay, and for most people they don't even go that far. If it's not on the label, it's not on the label. But okay, and you said only 2 were on the MSDS sheet, so they're not a real.
That's right, any 2. And let me tell you about the MSDSs. Companies who have MSDSs think that these are the authoritative document on product ingredients. Okay, they think, well, I talk with firms all the time saying, if I tell them your air fresheners are toxic, they say, no, but look at the MSDS, it says it's organic. Well, a couple of things here too. First of all, the term organic, natural, non-toxic, essential oils, all of these are meaningless when it comes to consumer products. I tested, among these 25, I tested many that were considered green cleaners, green air fresheners, green organic products, ones that said non-toxic, all natural, natural fragrance, essential oils. They were just as toxic, if not more toxic, than the brands that didn't say that. So be warned, the word natural fragrance, organic fragrance, essential oils means nothing when it comes to these products. Also, I have found no such thing as a safe or non-toxic fragrance. Every fragrance and fragrance mixtures in these products emitted hazardous air pollutants, which have no safe exposure level. Okay, back to the MSDS. There is no requirement for manufacturers of a product to disclose all ingredients on an MSDS. They don't even have to disclose hazardous ingredients on an MSDS if it's part of the fragrance mix. Fragrance mixtures are exempt from disclosing their ingredients on an MSDS. And in the review of the MSDSs, again, what was surprising were that these products emitted chemicals at levels considered hazardous, but they were not on the MSDSs. So MSDSs are unreliable. Do not trust them. People put a tremendous amount of reliance and faith in these, and they're not. They're not accurate.
And it's, boy, again, from just talking to poisoned people, they're saying, I don't get it. I'm buying the organic essential oil products, scented with organic essential oils, and I'm getting sick.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Right. Those organic essential oils have solvents in them.
What?
They have solvents. Most essential oils out there on the market are extracted using solvents.
Oh.
petrochemical. So it's the petrochemical problem again. Now, I have heard from some chemically sensitive people that there are some essential oils that they can tolerate because evidently they're produced with distillation, not with solvent. So there are some companies out there, but I'm not able to recommend any particular names or brands, but there are some out there. But for the most part, essential oils cannot be trusted to be non-toxic.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. And that's what so many people have said, in our discussions, that it's perplexing. Wow. Okay. I'm just going to take a little breather. If you'd like to grab a glass of water, sip of water. I need to go back to the chat room because I can just tell people are going, what?
Okay. So 1 minute, or when do we reconvene?
Oh, let's just say 10 seconds. I'm just going to focus from listening to you to seeing what's going on in the chat room, and welcome people who have joined us.
Okay, very good.
Okay. Welcome to people who have joined us in the chat room. I'm just amazed at what I'm hearing. I really... so
am I.
To hear the explanation.
I need results, I know.
It's stuff we all have been finding out, unfortunately, through trial and error, but to hear the explanation as to why. I know I've been asking why do essential oils, you're saying it's solvents, which are petrochemicals in the distillation process.
Well, actually, distillation is one process of extracting essential oils, but typically solvents or other types of synthetic chemicals are involved in the essential oil production process.
Okay. Wow. All right. Let's get on to another question here. Right. So let's talk about the research and the studies that you've been able to do. Do you think this will trickle into medicine or public policy? I mean, I think I asked you that, but what can we expect from your research?
Well, what I really think what's going to change things around is when the public and consumers start to learn about this and that they demand change. Then things will turn around, because I think there's three parts here. One is government, one is business, and one is the public. And when the public starts to demand change, when they start complaining to companies and they start, telling restaurants, I can't go there because you have air fresheners, complaining at city council meetings because of the dryer sheets being vented outside. If they have an adverse reaction, file an incident report at the place where you get sick. So eventually there's enough complaining and enough of an uproar that government will start to take attention, and so will businesses. The businesses will start to make products that do not cause these adverse health effects. Because right now, it's profitable to make these products, so they're going to keep doing it. But with public awareness will come change. And so people really have to complain.
Speak up, speak out, and write the companies.
Write letters. Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Because I'm fighting trying to get air fresheners banned, trying to get air fresheners out of all. I mean, I'm surprised that air fresheners are in places like hospitals. Well, air fresheners have chemicals at levels that are more hazardous than cigarette smoke, yet they put air fresheners in every place. And when I try to get them removed, the companies or the institutions will say, well, people complain about the smells. What they don't realize is these air fresheners can cause brain damage, lung damage. They can cause genetic damage. I have to say, a human smell has never caused that kind of damage. I mean, these are seriously toxic chemicals coming out of air fresheners.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's amazing. Well, we're just at the beginning, like the infancy of awareness for most people, I think. So talking about it, talk with your neighbors, have people listen to this, people who are going to download this later, pass it on, because it's really important information. It's more toxic, Anne said, than cigarette smoke. So this is what we're dealing with.
Yeah, in general. But there are chemicals in air fresheners that aren't in cigarette smoke that are more toxic, and there's some chemicals in air fresheners that are at higher levels. These air fresheners are toxic. I have not found a single one that is not toxic.
You're saying even the ones that say organic, non-toxic, and natural?
Those were actually the most toxic of all the ones I've tested. The ones that claim to be all natural and organic.
Boy, consumers, are we confused?
Well, there's no regulation of these terms. They can say anything.
Okay. And that's why we're confused, because we're not getting simple information.
Right, and because the average person doesn't have the ability, it costs about $1,500 to test one product. So your average person isn't going to go out there to find the right lab to be able to test these products. So it's a thing where we're really relying on companies to do adequate testing and disclosure, but they're not.
Mm-hmm. So we don't get the information of what's in them. We are being kind of swayed by marketing with putting a nice butterfly or putting a certain word such as natural or organic or non-toxic on the bottle, and that is making a lot of us think it's going to be healthy and safe. So let's talk about I guess your point is just avoid these, don't use them at all.
I'd say fragrance products, absolutely avoid them. There is nothing that's healthy in a fragrance product.
Okay. Talking about fragrance, this question came up. What is it in the stuff in, let's say, laundry, let's say fabric softener sheets? What is it in the stuff that makes it incredibly hard to get out?
Oh, that is the question I'm trying to find. Well, I've been investigating that. Why are these chemicals so tenacious? Why are they impossible to get out after multiple washings, putting out in the sunshine and the rain, trying to get these chemicals out? What is it? Well, actually, what I've learned is that the companies that have designed the fragrance chemicals to be tenacious, that's considered a positive attribute of fragrances, so that they do cling and stick and adhere to clothing and last a long time. The actual chemical molecular process I'm still investigating, but that is something that the companies want to do with their fragrances. They want that signature scent to be in their product and to remain on clothing.
A signature scent, it's part of branding?
Pretty much, yeah. They want it to stay there and last a long time.
Or is that what we're asking for?
Right. There's actually a term, fragrance substantivity is the term that's used, substantivity, and that means just long-lasting, persistent, tenacious fragrances.
Okay. So maybe they think consumers want it to last long because that would be a positive, but if enough consumers buy unscented, really unscented versions of products, then that sends a message that we don't want it.
Right. And as a caution, some unscented products are actually the fragrance products with the addition of a masking fragrance. So you actually have another set of fragrance chemicals on top of the original fragrance product. So again, you have to be very careful because unscented fragrance-free products I have seen have a fragrance and a masking fragrance.
Okay. Very good to know. And again, thank goodness there are all kinds of options and alternatives to talk about, and people interested in tips or whatever, talk to a canary in the coal mine. Talk to someone who has an environmental illness, who's learned to use and choose really non-toxic products. And that's what we do on Living in a Chemical Soup, is exchange some of those ideas, because we found out the hard way, most of us, that you just can't believe the packaging and you have to dig a little deeper. And yeah, not everyone reacts the same. There isn't one magic bullet for everyone, but what you're saying, like the petrochemicals are found in things I had no idea there were petrochemicals in fragrance until I got sick, and I couldn't be around these things, and the absolute bombardment of our cities and towns and houses with petrochemicals, when you start understanding where it's hidden and where it is astounding, isn't it?
Yes.
Another reason to get off oil.
Yes.
Okay. I just have a couple more questions, and then we'll go to the chat room and see if other people have questions. I guess this is more of a philosophical question. People, when we talk about getting rid of the stuff that's put on the shelves that is making people sick, other than banning things and using your consumer power, are there other ways, maybe on a policy level, that can handle this problem?
in terms of having safer alternatives. Well, I guess one thing is that there's good news is that there's good alternatives that exist. At least for household products, they are less expensive and less toxic. So from a policy perspective, it's really exciting because I think if consumers have information, they can change to less toxic products. Again, it's safer for them and it's better for the environment. That these chemicals not only affect them, but they also get into our air, our water systems, and our soil. So there's actually benefits from individual use of less toxic products. And I said they're less expensive and they're simpler to use. Things that our grandparents used, like baking soda, white vinegar, Bon-Ami. Instead of air fresheners, which they don't have any hygienic purpose. They don't clean the air. Just use ventilation instead. So there's simple, less expensive alternatives. So it's not asking people to it's not imposing upon them additional effort or expense. It actually can be beneficial all the way around.
Mm-hmm. And what about labeling? I mean, even if it said this is steroidicalacapoopium, nitrolacatucatuk, I mean, even if the chemical elements were labeled on products, I wouldn't be able to make sense of them.
Right.
What are your thoughts on, making manufacturers label the ingredients?
Well, that's an important question because, understandably, if you have a label and there's 200 fragrance chemicals in the product, it would be overwhelming to see all 200 chemicals. You don't know which ones are going to be hazardous and which ones might be not as hazardous. So on one hand, philosophically, I think it's important to have full disclosure of ingredients. On the other hand, we don't want to overwhelm consumers. So at a very minimum, what I'd like to see is at least disclosure of chemicals that are already known to be toxic and hazardous and that are already regulated in other media coming out of a smokestack. So at a minimum, at least disclose the ones that are toxic and hazardous. Also, this is just individual chemicals. We still don't know about all the effects of mixtures, and that's a concern. So while there's been this chemical-by-chemical focus trying to regulate individual chemicals, I come back saying, we know people are getting sick from exposure to these everyday products. Rather than the question, well, what are the chemicals and what are the levels, say instead, people are getting sick from them, let's figure out what the mixtures are and what is it in these products that's causing these effects. So really listen to the canaries. The canaries will tell you what's not safe. Yeah.
Oh, if only everyone were as reasonable as you.
Well, what's interesting, too, is that the European Union has recently come up with regulations that companies need to disclose on their labels fragrance ingredients if they're any one of a list of 26 fragrances. So there's this list of 26 fragrances. And if it's above a certain concentration, it needs to be listed on the levels of cosmetic products or detergents. But paradoxically, in all of the products I've tested, with the exception of 2 of these 26, none of these other were in any of the products. In other words, it seems like they've got the wrong list of chemicals, and these aren't necessarily the ones that have toxicities associated with them either. So in a way, this list from the European Union has missed not only the most prevalent fragrance chemicals, but also the ones that have the ones of most concern, that are the hazardous air pollutants.
A lot of work to be done. Wow. Yeah. How do you define toxic when we say a chemical is toxic?
Okay, that's the word. We can have a whole discussion on toxic because toxicity depends on many things. It depends not only on the chemical itself, but of the other chemicals that it's reacting with. Depends on the exposure route, whether you're inhaling it, whether it's getting on your skin, whether you're ingesting it. It depends on your individual susceptibility, of course. So toxicity depends on many things, and so it's difficult to say, although I say the word toxic chemicals, it can be toxic in many different forms. Neurotoxicity, toxic to the brain, a respiratory toxicant, toxic to the lungs, toxic to the kidneys, the immune system, the developmental system. So there's different mechanisms and target organs of toxicity as well. So when I say the word toxic, I refer to when chemicals are classified as have a certain type of toxicity. That's what I'm referring to. Now, of course, everything depends on levels as well. But again, going back to that, for some of these chemicals, they're considered to be toxic even in very small amounts.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Makes sense. A lot of people have children, newborns in homes with these products. You know, when I'm absolutely flabbergasted when I go to the EPA or when I go to a website that says such and such is safe for people, period. And I'm going, well, then why have I heard of thousands of people getting sick from it? And I mean, who are they testing? Who are they doing the research on? And do people of different ages, different immune system abilities, different detox abilities have different effects? Are they accounting for these differences in research?
Not really. Typically, things are tested on healthy adults, and for consumer products, they're usually tested for dermatological effects, like do you break out in a rash? They're not looking at neurotoxicity. Does it affect your brain? Respiratory toxicity? Does it affect your genes? Does it affect your immune system? Also, as you can imagine, it's not possible or legal in America or many countries to do exposure tests on humans when you know they're become very sick from them. So all that we really have now to go on are like the epidemiological studies when people say these products make me sick and here's how they make me sick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. Wow. Okay. Let me see if I've still got so many questions, but I'm going to give people in the chat room a chance to jump in here. If you have a question, you can certainly call in. The number is 724-444-7444, TalkCast ID 11292, and you'll be prompted through the process if you'd like to talk with Anne. Anne is Dr. Anne Steinemann from the University of Washington. And we've been talking about the toxins in everyday household products, such as air fresheners, fragrance, and all kinds of things from cleaning products to cosmetics to whatever. So if you are on the line, I'm going to go through the callers here and just check in. If you don't want to talk, just say, I'm listening. So let's go first to Northeast California. Hello, Northeast California.
Oh. That must be me.
That is you. Right? Yes, it is. Welcome.
My name is Susie Lippener. Welcome. Thank you, and thanks for doing this a lot. The question I have is I'm going to be meeting tomorrow with the director of nursing at my local hospital to ask her to put on the books a hospitalization protocol for chemically sensitive people and an unscented workplace policy.
Great.
And I was wondering if there was anything else besides what you've talked about tonight that you would recommend that I bring up to her as part of this discussion.
Well, I'm so glad you're doing that. I really commend you. That's wonderful. Fortunately, there's a lot on the internet now about fragrance-free workplace policies, especially in hospitals. And you may have already seen that, but just a simple Google search will pull up a lot of websites on fragrance-free workplace policies. And so you might be able to get some ideas from those.
Okay. Great. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I'm
Thanks
so proud
so much for the work you're doing.
Well, you're on the ground doing the important work. Right.
Thanks for your question, and I'm just going to mute you, and please hang on and keep on listening. Thanks a lot, California.
Thank you.
I'm really grateful, Anne, that you took the time to just help us to understand this very confusing but yet real and problem that so many of us are living day to day, that you've lived. And when we hear of anyone, just as Julie said, anyone who is putting science to what's going on and putting the words and the vocabulary and really standing up for us and saying, pay attention, we so appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much. You all are the heroes. Thank you so much.